What's up, my good people? How y'all doing? Today, I'm just bringing y'all a little bit of a story time. Um, some of you may know, some of you may not know that I am now a full-time therapist working to get my license in the state of Oregon. And that's where I live, in that area generally. And before I became a therapist was a long, long road to becoming someone who was even able to be in touch with their emotions. And I feel like my story is a story that a lot of black people can relate to. I hope that the black people who are listening to this can actually learn from this, because this was a really, really long journey that started for me. And it started about 14 years ago, really, when I had my first son. But before we get to that, let's just take it all the way back. My mother grew up in the backwoods of Mississippi. She was born right after segregation, if I'm correct. And still, we all know, as far as especially rural areas, they tend to change lives. Some of the social norms were still in place when it came to how black people operated with white folks. My mother grew up in a place that you can almost reach out and touch the effects of slavery. That's where I used to spend my summers down. I spent a lot of time in Mississippi, and I still go back to visit my family. And to survive that is a very hard thing to do. My grandfather's grandparents were enslaved. That's how close we are. That's how close we are to slavery. When it comes to this, understanding growing up in a hard environment, poverty stricken, limited opportunity, all those different things, people under debt. My grandfather was in a sharecropping family, working the fields all his life. My grandmother had to make clothes. They did so much. My grandfather hunted. They grew their own food. All these things just to survive, right? And survive is actually a major part of the story of black people and feelings, emotions, and being intact with those emotions. My father grew up here in Portland. His grandparents moved out here to work in the shipyards, and it's interesting because he remembers the whites only signs in the stores and different things like that. He remembers segregation. Yeah, all the way up here in Oregon. Yeah, one of the most segregated and had some of the harshest racist laws there was in this country, as far as excluding and punishing black people for even being here and establishing a life here in the state of Oregon. But I digress. He was raised by his grandparents, who were also from Mississippi, believe it or not, different part. And they raised him like we typically get raised. And when I say we, black people, raised us in preparedness for a very, very hard world. Some of the same gender norm standards. Men don't cry. No one to really talk to and actually process these emotions. Just him and his older brother. That's who they were raised by. Raised by his grandparents. His mother's parents, to be exact. So they grew up in a traditionally black culture. And a lot of that was passed down to me. Now, they did a great job. They cared for me. We had real conversations. Just like all parents, they grew and learned and knew different things and applied different things in their parenting and how they parented us and worked with us and connected with us as we got older. So this is definitely nothing to bash them. But what they did was they gave me the best they had. They gave me what they knew. What comes to mind is Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, describing that fear that black parents have for their children. That fear that this harsh world that we live in, that oppresses us, that attacks us, that hates us just for the color of our skin, they are consumed by it. And if I want to be honest with you, how could they not be consumed by it? So they teach us this fear. We come from a long, long history of oppression, and they teach us, they do their best to teach us how to live with that, how to deal with that. And that's really important as a black person. The thing about that was I began to be at a crossroads. I found out I was having a son. I found out I was having a boy. I was going to be responsible for him. I knew I needed to set an example. But right then I started assessing what type of man I was and what type of man I wanted my son to be. Will he be able to cry? How would he talk about emotions? How would he talk about feelings? At this point in my life, I was only working at a bank. I was a banker at a bank. No, not a profession I really wanted to be in. I was really just at a place where I needed to figure this out. I had no qualms about being a father. I was ready. I felt like I was born to be a father in a lot of senses. His mother was somebody we were in line to get married, and we did eventually get married. So it wasn't a situation to where, I had any of those things to worry about. But the question remained, what kind of man was I going to be? And what kind of man did I want to be? Or what kind of man did I want my son to be? How was I going to encourage him? And so it got to the point where this is a history I had to sit with. Growing up, we never talked about feelings. We never processed our emotions. What was most important was to persevere, was to be strong, man up. And those were the things that I embodied. I think a lot of those things were actually things that were detrimental to my first marriage and things I had to work on in this marriage in order to actually connect with somebody, to unite with another person, and also be the healthiest me. I had to learn how to not bury my emotions like I had all my life. I had to learn the language I needed to communicate what I was feeling. It's something that we just did not do. So at 25 years old, I had my son. Of course, nothing changes like that in an instant. But I'm working on myself. I'm noticing different things. I'm a new father. Everything's going great. And I remember this really important thing. My cousin Nisha, who's more like a sister to me, we play this game. You get on my nerves. You get on my nerves. She say I get on my, so we always like, ugh, you get on my nerves. You annoyed, right? And so we did our little thing. And I told my son, Kendall, give Auntie Nisha a hug. He said, mm-mm. And he kind of just looked at her. I said, boy, what's wrong with you? And he's only about 1.5. But, black parenting, man. Hug, teach them young, right? Hug Auntie Nisha's, man. What you doing? I said, hey. I said, no, look, come here. And I remember I gave her a hug. And I said, it's okay. Like, give Auntie Nisha a hug. And then he looked at me, give her a hug. And then he gave her a hug. And that stuck with me so much because, of course, I've heard this a million times before. But that solidified that he wasn't looking to what I was saying and what I was telling him to do. He was looking at what I was doing. That was the type of man he was going to be. Was the type of man I was. The example that I created was the example that he was going to work from. And that's when I really, really began to explore and to deal with my emotions and to deal with feelings. I dug into our history. I have a background. My degree is in, my undergraduate degree is in ethnic studies with a focus in African American history. Again, I told you about my summers that I spent in Mississippi, where you could see the old slave quarters easy, right? All the time. Like you feel the essence of that type of oppression. We used to watch Roots down there every time the VHS cassette, the real deal. We not talking about no DVD. We talking about VHS for y'all who know and for y'all who don't know. So we watched all those tapes when we went down there in the summers. Black people developed what they needed to develop to survive. In order to endure the type of oppression that we're talking about feet getting cut off. We're talking about being in a constant state of being controlled, whipped, beaten, family separated. In order to survive, one had to put their emotions away. One had to develop a certain resiliency, a certain shell. And that was taught because the world, though the institution of slavery changed, the world stayed dangerous. And so we pass this on from generation to generation to generation. I began thinking about that, about the idea of being strong and what that really means. Does that mean lack of vulnerability? Does that mean the inability to feel? Does that mean hiding my feelings and emotions better? Does that mean not talking about something and getting over it? Could mean so many different things to so many different people. But the more I thought about it, the tools that were given to me, that were used to get us through some of the hardest experiences any group of people I've had in this world, on this earth. Those same things that was taught to you, passed down to you. Some of that stuff you passed down to other folks, your kids, your nieces, your nephews, your cousins, your brothers, your sisters you taking care of. Some of those same traits that you see every day passed down out of survival. And now that we're not in that place, those same survival skills no longer serve us the same. I began to understand in my journey to be a better person that I had to do something different. Then here comes the divorce. Got divorced from my first wife. It was irreconcilable differences. That was hard. Divorce is hard. One of the toughest times in your life. And that was the the most I reflected, maybe. But I know that's when it really began. What did I do? What went wrong? What could I have done differently? How did I let it get to that point? What didn't I see that I should have seen to prevent this? And I began meditating. I began getting into the Bible a whole bunch. And again, that constant state of reflection and processing. What do I need to be a better husband than what I was? Now, of course, it takes two to tango. It wasn't all my fault. But I'm not trying to put my ex-wife down or nothing like that, and my baby mama down. I don't want to do that. I don't need to, because it wasn't all her fault either. Right? But I needed to figure out how to actually deal with my emotions. I needed to find out how to actually process my emotions. That survival tool of burying them, persevering, being strong, did not help me in my first marriage. And I'm glad, if nothing else, that I took this step at that moment to become a better person for the sake of my son and for the example I had an opportunity to set. As I began to grapple with my personal family history and the history of my people in this country, I began to understand that it's actually liberating to feel. Because we were treated inhumanely, we responded out of survival with cutting that piece of our humanity out of us. I began to understand that one of the most revolutionary things you can do as a black person is to begin tapping into your emotions. They have been cut off from us for so long. And by no means am I saying we need to disregard some of the wisdom of the previous generations that helped us survive. But it's now time to reassess and actually figure out how we can find balance, how we can get back to our human selves, how we can get back to wholeness. Through a winding road of multiple jobs, I ended up becoming a restorative justice coordinator for an elementary school. And all of it was about social emotional learning. That's it. It's about repairing harm, the idea of repairing harm, and trying to teach that to elementary school kids from kindergarten to 5th grade. From there, I became a school counselor. Again, supporting students through some of their toughest moments, through loss, through deportations, through all different types of things, working with families as a school counselor. All of these provided me the opportunity to continue to develop, continue to learn, continue to understand a different way of things. And when the education system broke me, which is another story for another time, I was fortunate enough that my graduate degree also afforded me the opportunity to become a therapist full time, and so I became a therapist. Throughout this whole journey, I have learned myself. I have been able to analyze our people, my family, the world, and I am better for it. I am more human for it. So I want to encourage you, all my black folks, to do the hardest thing, and that's face your emotional fears. Sit with what's hard. Learn to process it. Learn the impacts of trauma passed down through the generations, passed down from your parents. Learn how to process those things. Learn how to respond. And seek professional help. Now, as a therapist, I am quick to tell people I am not the end all be all. You're going to need it all. You're going to need your spiritual practices. You're going to need your support network. You're going to need your elders, your parents, your aunties and uncles. You're going to need your friends, your siblings. You're going to need the homies you hoop with. You're going to need supportive coworkers. You're going to need hobbies, exercise practice, all of it. But let's begin taking that leap. And let's begin continuing the trend. Because I see more and more people, Black people specifically, participating in therapy, participating in emotional connection and emotional healing. So this is just another addition to that. This is just me encouraging you to be revolutionary and to feel. All right, y'all. It's Donnie Chocolate signing out. Peace.